Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Abraham?
Present.
Commissioner Galt?
Present.
Commissioner Kaler?
Present.
Commissioner Watkins?
Present.
Mayor Paxton?
Present. Commissioner Watkins, you have somebody you'd like to introduce?
Yes, sir, Mayor. Thank you very much. I'm honored to introduce my pastor, Topper Council, Associate Pastor of Southland Baptist Temple. His father founded Southland Baptist Temple in 1953 with a little over 50 charter members, and today has over 3,800 members. Of course, we don't all show up on every Sunday morning, but like most good Baptists. But anyway, Topper introduced me to Jesus Christ September 30th, 1975, one of my best friends. And so, Topper, if you would, do the invocation for tonight, please.
Yeah, Topper, while you're coming to the podium, if you would, come on. After Brother Topper gives his blessing, then I'd like to ask Commissioner Galt to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if we will all stand, please.
Our Heavenly Father, what an honor it is to be a Christian, to know Christ. I'm so thankful, Lord, that you're not a religion, you're not a code of ethics, a set of rules, or a philosophy of life, but you're our Savior. And Lord, I just thank you for these wonderful people here before me. I thank you for Gerald and the privilege you gave me of leading him to Christ. I thank you for Richard and his friendship through the years, and all these folks that you have placed and the city has placed in these positions of leadership. Lord, we hear thunder outside. I think we all are thinking the same thing. We need rain. We need it badly. Lord, I pray that even before we get out of this meeting tonight, that we will see a great rain come our way. Now, Lord, you bless this meeting and bless our leaders, bless this country. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to its republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Brother Topper, thank you very much. Appreciate the kind words. Any additions or deletions, Mr. City Manager?
None.
Okay. We will start the appeals procedure. This appeal is by the Department of Main Street, who's appealing a decision by the Demolition Control Committee to allow R&B Real Vest LLC, hereafter referred to as the owner, to demolish the Ethan Allen carriage house structure that's located on 114 North 3rd Street. At the hearing, the Board of Commissioners should review the information provided to the committee by the owner, R&B Real Vest LLC, review the appeal document by Main Street, permit each of the parties to the appeal to supplement the information each has provided, so long as it is limited to supporting or objecting to the evidence and information provided the committee at the initial review. Hear arguments of each party in support of its position. And the issues before the board is whether there was evidence to support the committee's decision. This is not a public hearing. Only parties to the appeal may present arguments in supportive or opposing evidence at the hearing. So we will start out with testimony by Paul King, Chairman of HARC and committee member, concerning the application and synopsis of what was considered by the committee. Introduction of certificate of demolition and basis for the decision. Paul, if you will come forward, I will ask the city clerk to swear you in, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
I do.
Okay, Mr. King.
Well, as you mentioned, Mayor, Chairman of HARC is one member of the three-member Demolition Control Board, the other two being the city planner and the chief building inspector. Steve Irvin is here tonight as the director of planning. Les Fugate served as the chief building inspector for our deliberations. We met on the morning of May 11th, I believe, with findings released May 17th. Each member of the four topics of our deliberations, each member was allowed either a -1, 0, or a neutral position, or a +1 for demolition, and then the scores were tallied. Les and I would say, agreed on most points in the deliberations. Steve was a little more reserved. Is that a fair statement? With his comments. So I don't know, do you want me to go over each of those four for the board, for the commissioners? Is that?
Please.
Okay. First one, 35, referenced under 34-75A, the effect of proposed demolition on the location for which that demolition is requested. Les and I each kind of took a neutral stance there. The demolition, in our opinion, it's not necessarily on the Broadway core. The interior of the structure is deteriorated, but we had no real evidence on what they had planned on doing with the structure if it remained standing. Steve was more reserved that the streetscape would be removed from the National Historic District. We did find that the structure, because of the interior, it appeared that it was built after the purchase paper building adjacent to it to the north, and that you could see advertisement within the Ethan Allen building on the exterior of the purchase paper building, which told us that it was probably built after and therefore not structurally tied to the other property. 3475B, the relationship between the demolition and other structures in the landmark site, historic district, or other structures considered significant to the stabilization of historic districts. Les and I each voted +1 on this, Steve -1. We both felt that the existing elevation does not contribute. And I want to make that point very clearly. The branding that was applied sometimes back in the 70s does not fit in with historic character, in our opinion. Now, we understand, and there's an image that we did not have an opportunity to see that's part of the appellant's letter, which provided a much better illustration of the facade of that. However, we have no way of knowing if that is still intact underneath the Ethan Allen shingle covering or not. That would require a selective demolition to discover what remains. But that was the way we felt, that it really did not contribute because of that branding. It didn't represent the traditional storefront image. The third item, 34-75C, the development plan of the owner and the effect of the development on the city or area of which the city in which the property is located. Again, Les and I were +1. Steve was -1. Steve noted that parking is not necessary or not needed in the downtown area. And I think that overall that's probably true, but it appears that locally in that 3rd Street Jefferson
area with all of the tenants in the U.S. Bank building, Four Rivers Behavioral Health, and the other businesses, there seems to be a local need there. And as we all understand, people don't want to walk any further than they have to. I mean, I park in the lot that's 5 to 10% full every day. But again, then that goes to our next deliberations of item 4, 3478A, which lists for buildings listed in section 3480 and 3481 of this code, the committee shall study the questions of economic hardship for the applicant and shall determine whether the site can be put to reasonable beneficial use with the approval of the demolition application. I think the applicant, the owner, wants to convert this to a paying or reserved parking lot so that can generate some income for them. We understand that that could probably generate more income than spending well in excess of $1 million renovating a structure for no declared tenant. So I'll let them kind of address that. But we all voted positive on that, recognizing the deteriorated condition of the interior in terms of the roofing, the wall structure, interior column structure, floor structure. You know, water does a bad thing when it gets into buildings like this. So it's obviously gone on for some time that it hasn't been tended to, and it seems to really have turned the inside of the structure.
Okay.
Any specific questions?
I'll ask now the commissioners. If any of the commissioners have a question, I'll start down at Commissioner Abraham's side. If you have, fine.
No,
if
I
you
don't
don't have. Mr. Galt?
I do not.
Mr. Gator? Mr. Watkins? All right, we need to the applicant Main Street, the director, Lisa, do you have any questions for Mr. King? Yes. All right, can you ask him there, or well, come on up? I'm sorry, come on up.
Hi, I'm Lisa Thompson. You said that under the criteria for existing, that the existing cover that's on the property does not contribute. If, knowing that you've seen the picture now of what is potentially underneath that and what the historic building looks like, would that change your vote? And if it did, would the permit still have been issued?
Yes, actually, it might have changed mine. The view that we were able to look at was an older tax assessment view. Is that what that came from? No. The one that we saw during deliberations was a kind of an oblique angle look, which, Steve, do you have a copy of that? Okay. Which was a much poorer view than what you've seen in the appellant's documents. And yes, it might have. Scoring-wise, I don't think it changes it because of the numbers.
Okay. Any other further questions? The attorney for R&B Realvest, would you have questions? Sarah McGee, welcome to the
Thank you.
hearing.
I do have a few questions. I do want to go a little bit more in depth into what Mr. King and the committee decided. Did you in fact consider the elements? Now, just I guess to give a little bit more background, there is an ordinance that sets out what this committee needs to consider, correct?
Yes.
And did you go through the ordinance and consider what is requested of you?
Yes, those were the 4 points that I mentioned, 3475-A, B, and C, and then 3478A. Yes.
When you did that, you issued a finding that the structure was non-contributing within the downtown historic district, correct?
By definition of the demolition permit, yes, I believe that's right.
And you also made a second finding that the condition of the structure renders it beyond the economic feasibility of you to restore. That was,
I believe it's economic hardship.
can you look at the demolition permit? Let's get that actual language. I think you were going to introduce that, correct? Certificate of demolition.
Yeah, feasibility to restore, yes. Yeah, and I think that points at the economic hardship of putting, let's say, I'm throwing out a number, $5 million, whatever, whether you'd ever get that back out of that structure. That's the way we understood that section of the ordinance to read.
And so based upon your review of the ordinance and the facts submitted to you by RMB, the committee made a decision, and you've gone over, you tallied the votes, you considered each one of those, voted separately, and came up with a final decision, correct?
Correct.
Now, I do want to go over some of the things you talked about in that statute. The effect of the proposed demolition on the location. You did say that building is not structurally significant, correct?
It's not structurally significant on the adjacent property.
So it's not going to harm purchase paper for this
Correct.
building to be demolished?
That was our,
This building is
review.
not on Broadway, correct?
correct?
And in and of itself, it is not a historic property, correct? It's in the stabilization.
Correct,
zone.
yes. Yes.
Now, the relationship between the demolition and the other structures in the, well, it says relationship between the demolition and other structures in the, considered significant to the stabilization of historic districts. So I think that's where you brought up historical and architectural significance.
Under item B?
Yes.
Yes.
So the current facade, and do you all, I have the handouts, do you all each have your handout that we gave out last week?
We've got it. Richard, you have,
So when we're talking about the Ethan Allen branding, we're talking about this whole front that says carriage house, all that, and that's just the front cover, so you can see that. And that's a 1970s branding and has no architectural, historical significance, correct?
Not in our opinion.
Now, I think when we discussed this earlier, you said that you really didn't know what was behind the facade, and that's still the case, is it not?
That's correct. You would have to perform a selective demolition to understand what's behind it, what was impacted by that 1970s work. You may find that they did more or less demolition than was indicated on the plans. We did look at those drawings. They were found. But whether the drawings, it could have been that more demolition had to occur to actually place that facade. You just don't know until you pull off the shingles.
So even considering the new drawings that you've now, or new pictures that you've now seen, there's no way to know if what's beneath that facade is still there, is still intact, and can be saved. No way to know that.
Correct. Not by looking at the picture.
So in order to even answer that question, if it could possibly be historical, it's going to require a huge amount of expense to do that selective demolition, to remove that facade, correct?
In expense, yes. Can't answer huge.
Would you defer to Beverly, part owner of R&B, here's refurbished many buildings downtown, to advise you of that cost?
Sure.
Okay. Now, I think at one point you also told me that the pictures you had seen were from a department store or a hardware store?
I think it's Harbor's Department Store. Is that
Harbor's
correct, the name?
Department Store? And that's the historical picture, correct?
Yes.
That's the one you say you didn't?
That's the one we did not see
Okay.
during our deliberations.
But you've
correct.
seen that now, correct?
Yes.
The building has had several uses since that time, correct?
I honestly don't know that
Well,
answer.
it was a bowling alley, it was apartments, it's been several things. And at some point, you told me that that created an issue of a new use and accessibility for anybody coming into that building, because it doesn't exist as it was in those pictures, correct?
Right. Well, you're looking, and if that's the case, you're talking about a couple building code issues. the usage change might evoke substantial structural upgrades depending on if you go from a mercantile to an assembly type of space. It would require multiple and extensive structural upgrades by the current building code.
Again, no department stores or huge hardware stores want to be moved downtown, to your knowledge, correct? So it's going to have a new use, most likely.
Yes.
So, again, I think your words were substantial upgrades, which would cost substantially amount of money,
Yes.
an expensive amount of money. It is a planned parking lot, and I do appreciate your comments that there seems to be a parking need there.
Locally, yes, I think so. Now, during the course of our deliberations, I might just add this, is we did feel like the development of that site plan needs to do something to address the streetscape, but we can't really vote on how we feel that the plan should be.
Of course, you're aware there's parking immediately adjacent to this building now, correct?
Mhm.
And
That's
that
all-
is,
Isn't that all reserved for the apartments on Second?
it is, but there is parking, and if you look at picture 8 in your packet, you can see the parking that's immediately beside this building. This is also owned by R&B. So it would really just be a continuation of what's already there, correct? So again, it wouldn't
Well-
change the streetscape that much except for the front of the building.
It's a significant change to the streetscape in that you're losing 25% of that block. So I wouldn't take that lightly.
So, 2 parts to this ordinance: historical significance, development, economic hardship. You ruled on both. Now, let's go over the economic hardship.
We ruled on 4 points and gave them equal
Okay,
value.
so-
I'd
okay.
rather say that.
Okay, let's talk about economic hardship then. The language reads, whether the site can be put to reasonable, beneficial use without the approval of the demolition application. So if R&B can't demolish this building, can this building be put to any reasonable, beneficial use at this time?
It was our opinion, no.
And that's because the roof is extremely poor, would have to be replaced.
Roof deterioration, floor deterioration.
There is significant water damage on all the floors down to the
Yes.
basement. So at some point, it's gone from roof, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st basement floor. That's how much water damage is in this building. There would also need to be all heating and air. There's no heating and air in the building,
Yes.
correct? There would have to be removal of the facade, which in itself is a gamble, because we don't know if there's anything historically significant under that.
Correct.
And that's all to stabilize the building.
Correct.
That's not to use the building.
Correct.
So the ordinance actually reads, can it be used as it is? It can't.
Correct.
We're going to go ahead and say, if we do all that work, the building's still not usable, correct? If you stabilize it, the building's still not usable.
It still has to be tailored to the individual occupants, yes.
Could there be any chance of a reasonable return of renting the existing building now?
I don't believe so, no. And I think the committee was agreed on that point. Do you concur, Steve?
And again, and I'm asking it as you, but this was a committee vote after review and approval of this plan. Well, after you reviewed this plan, then you approved the demolition permit.
Correct.
Is restoration, strike that, I think I'll wait. Thank you, that's all I have.
All right.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you. I'm going to take my leave. I need to be in Lyon County at 6,
Okay.
so
All right.
thank you all so much.
I would like to call Lisa Thompson, the director of Main Street. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, how are you? Next. Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I'm new at this. Okay. As a certified Main Street program in the city of Paducah, PRA's responsibility is to advocate for the preservation of historic structures and building in our historic downtown, and to advocate for a downtown area that is strong, not only historically, but economically. I know that all of you on this commission are also interested in these same things. And one key to achieving those goals is to work carefully to make sure that downtown Paducah remains structurally unified as a single area and not broken up by gaps that we create through such demolitions as this one. Every single historic structure in this community, downtown, is important to maintaining a sense of mass and depth of our downtown commercial core. We call Paducah the city of awards. And the reason that we win all these awards is that because we have a very strong historic preservation sentiment in this community. Jerry Montgomery created this demolition control zone to protect historic buildings. If you look at the history of what happened in Paducah, we've lost substantial numbers of buildings on our side streets. It's important for us to look at, especially on 3rd and 4th Street, these crossover streets, and create and maintain a mass that's there so that we can feed off of our historic downtown. The purpose of the demolition control zone is to protect against the demolition of structures and premises designated to be of substantial historical and/or architectural significance, or to be considered significant to the stabilization of our historic district, unless substantial economic development and redevelopment would be impeded. There's two criteria when looking at whether or not we should allow demolition of any historic structure in this zone. If the building is dangerous and imminent of danger of collapse, which was not considered, or if there is a substantial economic development that would be impeded. Therefore, demolition can only occur if there is substantial economic development or redevelopment, neither of which is in the case of this instance, because the land will only be used for a parking lot, and that does not support any development or redevelopment plan of record by or with the city. It has been said that the Ethan Allen building is non-contributing. It is. It's unfortunate that the slipcover that was applied to this building would lead you to think that underneath of it there is not a historic building that would contribute to our historic district. This is a picture of the photograph that Mr. King was talking about when Harbor's department store was in that building. I understand that if you look at the building permit for when the slipcover was applied, it implies that the original building is still intact underneath. My question would be possibly, how was the slipcover applied to that building? But I'm led to believe that it was done in a very sensitive way and that a majority of that building remains underneath that slipcover. I think it's also important that once a building is deemed non-contributing, it does not always mean that that building will remain non-contributing. Up on the screen, there's the 100 block of Broadway. If you look at the top photograph, that shows you what that block looked at before those property owners restored that block. And you can see that it's got it's covered in a very, look at the lanterns, the light post. We tried to line up the light post from the top and the bottom photograph. Actually, this 100 block of Broadway, until recently, when Melinda Winchester did a historical review of all the properties in downtown and lower town, was also listed as a non-contributing building. And I'm pretty sure that most of us in this room would say that that building, as they are now, even though they're on the record as being non-contributing, should not be demolished. You know, if this building is demolished, it's a bell that cannot be unrung. And on behalf of PRA and myself, I just urge you all to carefully consider this. And I assure you that PRA will continue to work with property owners to make sure that this sort of situation that we have tonight won't happen again.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll start at this end. Commissioner Watkins, do you have any questions for Lisa?
No.
Commissioner Kaler?
No.
Commissioner Galt?
Can you go back a couple of slides, maybe to,
That one?
no, what you found, the basis,
Oh,
the criteria? Mm-hmm. Those are the only two things. Where did that come from?
That's in the ordinance.
Can you show me where, maybe?
Hold on. Is it 71, Dan?
You hear that, Carol?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I heard it. Yes, 3471.
No, it's not in that sentence paragraph.
But I'm not finding it there.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
My question.
Danny's right behind you.
This article is intended to protect against demolition of structures designated an architectural significance or to be considered significant to the, unless substantial economic development or redevelopment would be impeded. Is that where you're getting it from?
Mm-hmm.
Second.
Okay. Okay. That's all.
Okay.
Commissioner Abraham?
No questions this time.
Okay, Sarah?
Actually, I'll ask that you flip back another screen where you put the okay, no, actually, that was it. The building is dangerous and in imminent danger of collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that in this ordinance?
I'm writing. Sorry. under 3479, it talks about the correction of dangerous conditions. And if the fire inspector or the chief building inspector determines that there are emergency conditions dangerous to life, health, and property.
Which, and I don't mean to beat this to death, is not what you put in the newspaper article, on TV, or commission. It does not say that language in this ordinance. And we are here to look at this ordinance, correct? Let me just ask a few questions. In fact, what you've put, there is some similar language to that first part. It does say, is intended to protect against demolition of structures and premises designated to be of substantial historical or architectural significant, or to be significant to the stabilization of historic districts unless substantial economic development and redevelopment would be impeded. I'll give you that. But that's in the purpose section, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Purpose and intent.
Mm-hmm.
But the ordinance, which you cited to as being set up to protect these buildings and to give the proper steps to go through to get a demolition permit, it also gives you the guidelines that you need to consider to make a determination, correct? And that would be 3475.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm a historic preservationist. I'm here to tell you that it is Main Street's job to protect historic buildings. You know?
And we certainly appreciate that, but this is an appeal from an ordinance that was considered by the Demolition Committee, correct?
Dan Key, would you give some interpretation of the way you understand this, as far as the criteria goes and what's in the ordinance? Do you?
No, she's right. The guidelines are in section 3475 that the committee, which is we call the Demolition Control Committee, these are the guidelines that they review in making their decision. And I think Paul King spoke to those earlier. And that's basically what we're doing, is proceeding according to the ordinance. So we go by the ordinance as far as, and because it's a valid ordinance with the city.
Okay.
I do have a few more questions. I understand that this is difficult and probably not a fair playing field to have to do this with a lawyer, so I understand that. I would, in your appeal letter, you very kindly acknowledge that Beverly, McKinley, and Ronnie James have made some significant investments in the downtown area.
They have, and they should be applauded for those efforts.
So these aren't some people fly by night who have no investment in the downtown area, correct?
No, but I also don't think, if you want to talk about the merits of the ordinance, it doesn't say that if you have done substantial amount in downtown, you get a pass.
Okay. Would you acknowledge that they would be very knowledgeable about the cost in restoring that building and whether it's an economic hardship? That they would be the best people to give that testimony?
I haven't seen any substantial evidence that they have submitted to justify their claim of economic hardship.
You heard Paul King testify that they indeed did submit proof of economic hardship, correct?
He stated that he did, but as I said, I have not seen it.
Okay. Just to be really clear, this building itself is not listed as historical property under the ordinance, correct?
This property is in the demolition control zone,
But
and it is protected under that ordinance.
But it itself is not a historical property because that's set out in a separate statute, correct?
It is not a contributing building to the historic district because it has an unfortunate slip on top of it. If that slip were to be removed, it would be just as contributing or as historical to Sue Clark's buildings in the 100 block of Broadway.
But you did hear Paul King testify that there was perhaps significant infill when putting on that slip and that there's no way to know what's beneath it, correct?
We do not know how that was applied.
And then you said, and I quote, I didn't quote actually, you were led to believe that it had been treated sensibly.
Correct.
Who led you to believe that?
Paul King did, when he said that the application that they submitted They have the drawings for how it was to be applied. We would only know that if on site, when they actually went to do it, if they did it differently.
So if Paul King is your source for that information, you would have to defer to what he just testified, that it would be a gamble and a substantial investment to take off that slip cover to see if there's even anything historical under there, correct?
No.
Would you concede that the demolition ordinance clearly contains a section which allows for demolition for economic necessity?
For the greater good, yes, but that goes back to substantial economic development. And I would contend that a parking lot is not substantial economic development.
Does section 3478, what is it entitled?
Economic hardship.
For buildings listed, the committee shall study the questions of economic hardship of the applicant and shall determine whether the site can be put to reasonable beneficial use without the approval of the demolition application. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, economic hardship is something to be considered here.
It is, but my question to you would be, how did you prove economic hardship? Was there a study done on what it would actually cost to redo the building? Was there,
Would you defer to Beverly McNeely's testimony about the efforts they've made and the cost they know that they will incur to redo this and their mortgage on this building?
well, I think that all of that should be laid out in a finding, and I don't see that there is a finding of economic hardship.
There clearly is a finding of economic hardship. What does it-
Well, but based on what? Someone's assertion? I mean, I can say I don't have money to paint the trim on my house, but that doesn't mean that, I can't afford to paint the trim on my house.
The condition of the structure renders it beyond the economic feasibility of you to restore. That's from Paul King, Les Fugate, and Steve Irwin, correct?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much. Yes,
Dan, would it be out of order for me to ask a question of Steve Irwin?
Steve,
Would it be out of order with the hearing?
I'm certain.
About the ordinance. It has something to do with the ordinance. Just,
come on up, Steve.
For clarification, is that, for clarification?
Yes.
on an issue?
Yes, ma'am.
on section, this ordinance is an ordinance, Chapter 34, Community Planning and Development, Article 4, Historic Buildings. And that's what this whole ordinance is about, historic buildings, correct?
Correct.
On page 3, section 3480, historic properties designated. The location of properties to be controlled by section 3471 through 3479R. Would you read that list off, Steve?
Absolutely. The Petter headquarters at 117 South First Street. Freight Depot, 310 South 3rd Street. Senate Hotel, 201 Broadway. Citizens Bank Building, 333 Broadway. St. Mary Academy Complex, 225 North 4th. Elks Lodge, 121 North 5th. Columbia Theater, 510 through 514 Broadway. Arcadia Theater, 500 through 508 Broadway. St. Francis de Sales Church, 540 Broadway. Irvin Cobb Hotel, 600 through 606 Broadway. Tillman House, 631 Kentucky Avenue, and the Old National Bank Building at 300 Broadway.
Okay. Tell me what that means, Steve. Does that mean that, I'm looking at it, these are the only properties that are protected?
No, I think it also
No.
includes properties located in section 3481, which is more of a district.
Okay.
Those
So
are
why
separate
are
listings.
those particular things listed?
I believe those are separate listings on the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay, so those are on the historic registry,
Yes.
where the rest of the properties are not.
No, when you have a district also, all properties can be contributing within the National Historic District. So we have a larger district, which is defined by the legal description you see there, and then you have contributing structures and non-contributing structures within that district.
Okay, thank you.
And Steve, don't we also have some listed as intrusions? I mean, it gets very confusing when people talk about contributing, non-contributing, and whether it's contributing to the fabric of the historic district or it's actually contributing to the historic register, correct?
Yes, what you've been hearing about it was a nomination for the National Register of Historic Places. I think the one I have is dated fall of 1978, and it has intrusions into Paducah Commercial District, and it has 114 North 3rd Street on that list of about 11 structures.
And can you define at that time what an intrusion might have been?
I cannot.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, Sarah, we'll call you up to present R&B Real Vest LLC side.
I intended to just question Beverly, so she could be under oath and you could hear her testimony.
Okay. Beverly, come on up to the podium, and clerk will swear you in.
All right, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Can you state your name, please?
Beverly McKinley.
And you are part owner of R&B Real Vest LLC, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The other owner is Ronnie James, correct?
That's correct.
R&B is the sole owner of the property located at 114th North 3rd Street,
That's correct.
and we refer to it as the Carriage House. Also, R&B refurnished the condos known as Riverside on Second property, correct?
Yes.
Have you been involved in the refurbishment of any other properties in downtown Paducah?
Several.
Be sure and speak into the mic.
Several. Several buildings in downtown.
Just give us a few of those.
Starting about 25 years ago, 126, 128 Broadway, which is now the Visitors Bureau. 201 Broadway, which used to be Paducah Harbor Plaza, which is now owned by Cardinal River. 215 Broadway, which is a two-story apartment complex. 220, 222, I used to own that one, which was Leela's Boutique. Is now Leela's Boutique, but something else is coming into that one, I believe. 301 Broadway, which was the old Nagel building, formerly KWHS. I also owned 123 North 2nd Street at one time, which is now Whaler's Catch Restaurant. And I also helped with the development with my partner at 117 North 2nd Street, where we developed 10 condos.
And the reason I ask you that question, Beverly, is are you very familiar with the costs and issues that come with stabilizing and refurbishing an old building in downtown Paducah?
I feel like I am.
Was the building on 2nd Street, the condo building, in as poor condition as the Carriage House building?
As critical.
So you are very familiar with the cost of restoring that type of building.
I am.
When did you purchase the Carriage House building?
Approximately in 2006.
What is the square footage of that building?
I think it's 35 to 40,000 square feet.
So it's a huge building.
It is.
Do you have a mortgage on that property?
We do.
Is the building currently usable for any beneficial purpose at present?
No.
If the demolition permit is not issued, can the building be used now?
No.
Can it be rented, used, anything?
No.
What is the current condition of the building? And you have provided some pictures that I think the commission has, correct?
I have.
And these are the same pictures that you provided to the demolition committee, correct?
That's correct.
Picture 14, let's start there.
I don't know which number that one is.
They're numbered. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. I think,
That's the roof.
oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry. That is the roof, and it's the last page in your document. That's the current status. And, well, in fact, it's a little worse at this point. The rubber roof tends to fly over and hang on the side of the building. If you're coming down 3rd Street, you can usually see it during a storm or high winds.
So in order order to even stabilize this building, much less use it, you would have to replace the roof, correct, completely?
You'd have to go back and go down to the sheathing to get to the very wood, down to the open beams, and come back in and put all new. And chances are the beams have had several damaged areas because of the weather. It's rained and leaked in going on 3 years that I can recollect. And that water has all gone to the first floor and down to the basement. So it's not only done damage to the roof, it has damaged the first floor where all the wood on the first floor is buckling. So you can't walk on a level floor anymore.
Okay. Now, to even stabilize the building again, you would have to do something called tuck point, correct?
Oh, yes.
And that's, if you look at pictures 6 and 7 and 11, basically what is tuck pointing?
Going back and restoring mortar into the, it's the mortar in between the bricks. But not only do you have that problem, you have soft material here because these bricks are so old. And many of them would have to be replaced, as we did on the condos on the 2nd Street next to Whalers. And when we did that property, we had to do tuck pointing, and it was to the tune of $220,000 just to tuck point the sides of those buildings and stabilize those.
So on this, in these pictures, you can see the back of the building, you can actually see the brick, correct?
Right.
And that would definitely have to be tuck pointed to stabilize the building.
Yes, and more so on the parking lot side.
On the parking lot side, which is the side of the building, which I believe is pictures 10 and 12, are you even sure there's brick under there?
Well, where you can see where the siding has come off and some of the I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, the stucco, thank you, I couldn't think of it. The stucco has come off, and there's actually bricks that have fallen, so we have not been able to lease those parking spaces due to the liability of falling bricks or any debris that might come off and damage someone's car.
So where the stucco has fallen off or the siding has fallen off, the bricks now fall off.
Oh, yes.
So that would, I guess, lead you to believe that it's not very stable.
It's dangerous.
That would have to be stabilized.
Yes, it would.
And again, I think you stated quickly that to do just the tuck point on the condo buildings, approximately the same size building, $220,000.
It was.
So the building would need new heat and air for 35,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
There's significant water damage on all floors.
And the roof. And I have no idea what abatement would run.
And what do you mean by abatement?
Removing any asbestos that might be in the building.
Do you believe that would be based upon your
Possible.
experience?
We've had it before.
So to stabilize the building, what would you anticipate just those costs being?
It could be anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000.
And that's not using the building, correct? That's
Right.
just stabilizing this.
That's correct.
So even after spending that money, would you be able to put the building to beneficial use?
No.
You would have to do basically a build-out to suit whatever business came in there.
Which means a new sprinkler system, new heat and air for all floors. We might even be required to put an elevator in if you're going to try to use additional upper floor usage. It's extensive.
To make the building more historically significant, you would have to remove the Ethan Allen store facade as well.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And do you know what's underneath there?
I do not.
What were your original plans for the property?
We had intended to do a phase 3, which would have been condos like we did on 117 North 2nd Street.
Do you have, to follow through with that plan, do you have any idea of the cost it would take to bring that to fruition?
With those 10 investors, it ran close to $5 million.
Now let me make sure we understand this. When you built the condos, you had investors lined up to start the project.
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't pay $5 million
No, ma'am.
and then sell them.
Right.
It was investors. Have you pursued investors for this project as well?
I have.
Have you had any committed investors?
No.
Have you had anybody even show serious interest in investing in that plan?
Only if we could have the 3rd floor condos, and there might have been 2 on a prospect list.
So not even
Nothing
committed.
for the 1st floor.
What happened? You had 10 investors the first time, and then what happened?
The economy had its plunge from Wall Street, and It'll triple down to Paducah.
Do you believe that if you invested that kind of money in this building, that you could ever hope to see a reasonable return on your expenditures for that building?
Well, no, I don't. But I can also tell you I have a partner on the 215 property, and that person has said no one will invest at this point because it's a 19-year return. And that's a long term for anyone to try and invest a major amount of money at this time in some of these properties. And that's a 3-story building.
Have you attempted, since the original plan to build the condos has not been brought to fruition, have you attempted to sell the property?
We have. I've had for rent signs. I've had for sale signs. I did rent it one year before the water damage became so severe that we couldn't do it anymore to quilt vendors for the 4-day quilt show, and that's the only time it's been used.
Has anyone, so you've had no serious offers
None.
on this property at all? Has anyone approached you about renting the property?
No.
And you did apply for and receive a permit to demolish this building.
Yes.
Is it your desire to demolish this building?
Not at all. If we had investors, and we're very open to PRA or anyone else that has investors that might be interested, we would certainly consider talking with anyone
But
with a plan.
Has that happened? We even continued this hearing to have that happen. Has that happened?
I have not talked to anyone that wants to invest in that building.
You've been offered no grants, no incentives, no tax incentive, nothing at this point, correct?
Oh, I've only heard of things that are available.
No commitment from
No
anyone.
commitment from anyone.
And the one thing that was available, I believe, was a potential draft copy of a grant for $50,000
For the roof.
for the roof.
Mm-hmm.
But how much do you anticipate the roof itself costing?
Well, 3 years ago, it was $80,000. I think it could be more at this point.
And that doesn't include the water damage.
No, because I don't know what's underneath.
Now, to get that grant, you had to have a certificate of occupancy within 3 years of the roof grant, correct?
I believe that's right.
To be forgiven, correct?
To be
Otherwise, it's
forgiven,
just a loan.
that's right.
So really, it does you no good because it's just going to be a loan for money, and you can't have this building.
Right. We already have a mortgage. It's just more debt.
Realistically, you can't get a certificate of occupancy with no investors, no potential sale.
No.
In 3 years
No.
at this point.
At this point, you're correct.
Now, you have suggested that this area be used for parking.
I have.
Quite frankly, tell me about interest in the parking facility.
Well, since the last meeting here, I had a call from someone that said they would rent all 25 or 26 spaces if we did turn it into a parking lot.
You had other interest in the parking lot itself?
The other parking lot that's adjacent to it, we do have 13 spaces rented, but the ones that are next to the Ethan Allen building I cannot rent because of the liability. And those 13 spaces have been generating income for the last, once we finished the project three and a half years ago.
Have you had more, what you could call real interest in the parking lot or in the use of this building? Or
The
restoration
parking
of
lot.
this building? Now, do you believe there is a need for downtown parking?
I
Paid parking
do,
there?
I
Explain
do.
why you think that.
Well, in my conversations with the past mayor, Jerry Montgomery, I think she was very wise in one of her statements that if every block took its worst building and removed it and turned it into parking, that might help solve a problem for that particular block where they would have parking for residents, and it would help get businesses, the customers could park on the streets and have the businesses would be able to park in that parking lot as well as residents that live in that block. And it makes sense.
So, I think Paul mentioned U.S. Bank employees. Now, you believe this would also help the Purchase Paper building, which is the building
I do.
to the left.
I do. I think it would be an asset to them if they ever, maybe PRA can help them with something. That building is much more stable than this one, and maybe they could help them with a tenant there, and then they will need parking, and there would be parking already available, which would be a big asset for them. Where are they going to park?
Purchase Paper has no parking, correct?
Not.
Street parking.
It has behind it, as a picture indicates here, 2 or 3 little spaces by the loading dock.
And now you perceive this as being something for residents who can't really park on the street, correct?
residents or anybody that works downtown and wants to secure a parking space that is secured, private secured.
And again, has anybody, your desire was to save this building?
It has been. We've waited 6 years. We've tried. 6 years.
Nobody's offered
I'm
you
trying to
any
be,
incentive
no,
to do this.
no one has offered any incentive. No one's come forward and said they want to buy it, rent it, lease it for long term. There hasn't been any activity.
Can you afford to stabilize and refurbish this building on your own?
No, absolutely not.
That's all.
Beverly, when the roof started leaking, was there any particular reason you didn't go ahead and fix it at that point?
Still looking for a prospect to come on board with us, hoping that that would happen. And I feel like we've been proactive to come before you now and do what's right, where other buildings maybe in town have been torn down without going through this. But we did what was right in coming forward and submitting a request for demolition before the city has to condemn it.
Commissioner Watkins, any questions?
No.
Commissioner Kaler? Commissioner Galt?
No.
Commissioner Abraham? Lisa, any questions for Beverly? Thank you.
I don't have any questions. I do have a statement.
All right.
I think, unfortunately, the statements given here tonight show the challenges that Lisa and her board face as we work to bring investments to downtown Paducah. It's a big challenge.
Thank you. Lisa, we're going, any further remarks in the way of a closing argument that you'd like to make?
I just want to make a statement that demolition by neglect is not a policy.
You might say that again. I don't.
Demolition by neglect is not a good policy.
Let me ask this question. Stop me if I'm veering off, because I don't know that it's been entered in, but I do know that you have been working with someone or met with Beverly to try to get someone in that property. Beverly, no one's contacted you? I see, because I heard that statement that no one had contacted. I kept hearing that when you were doing the questioning, but
Lisa did tell me that she had someone that she was going to give my number to call me, but they have not called.
No, I have been in contact with Beverly about this. The potential tenant, it so happens that her business is at the busiest she could possibly ever be. And that until the 1st of August, she really can't take the time to meet with the property owners.
And when did she first become interested in this property?
She is someone who's actually would like to relocate downtown, and this was something that I brought to her attention as an option so that we could avoid losing a historic structure. So,
Okay.
yeah. But there's no there's no commitment from her.
Okay.
Commissioner Abraham?
Just a statement. I don't have any questions. The ordinance, well, first of all, understanding that, like Commissioner Mayor Pro Tem Kaler said, it is a very challenging balance act to preserve historical buildings. So much so that we have an ordinance that parties have to go by for that to happen. If you want to tear down a historical building, there is a committee that certain criteria, they have to be met before that happens. And this process has been followed, and it was their decision to submit, to give the certificate of demolition. For those who are who love historical buildings, it will pain them to see that possibly go down. But there's a reason we have the ordinance here. My question to our city planner was, if I owned a building and it was ruled that the appeal was upheld, what happens to me? What happens? I got this building. I can't do anything with it. What happens? Well, you show it up and you wait. For how long? Don't know. So I think the process was followed, and that's a good thing about this. It has a process. You follow it, and the decision that's rendered at the end of this process, I feel, will be a just one.
Okay, Sarah, any closing comments?
Actually, I think Mr. Abraham said it very well. I will just say, we do appreciate the work that DRA does. Again, Beverly and Ronnie, R&B, are not people whose first thought was to tear down this building to make a parking lot. It's the only avenue open to them to attempt to even pay their mortgage. At this point, they are paying a mortgage every month on a building that isn't usable. The cost to just save the building is astronomical. That has nothing to do with even using the building. It's not economically feasible. As Commissioner Abraham said, there's a process. It was followed, and we ask this commission to uphold the Demolition Committee's determination that this building could be demolished. Thank you.
We have a motion here that Commissioner Galt is going to make, and we will vote on it. Before I do that, are there any other comments that anybody would like to make, a statement or anything?
Oh, it is.
Commissioner Watt?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I would just like to say that I'm sensitive to downtown Paducah, as I think most anyone, and I love the historical buildings and the floodwall murals and the shops. It attracts an awful lot of people. I wish that we'd had this review commission in place before the Carnegie Library was torn down. That's a building that should have been saved, and it's a crying shame that it wasn't. But all buildings are not the Carnegie Library. And when you go down there and look at a building and see that it's just not economically feasible. It's nice. It would be nice to go and restore every old building in downtown Paducah, but no one's going to do that for the fun of it. No one has the kind of money just to go down there just to make it look good. There has to be an economic recovery back from it to give one an incentive to invest their hard-earned money to make something out of it. And there are a lot of buildings that do return. And downtown Paducah is 500% better, more attractive than it was back in the 80s when everyone went to the mall. It's a beautiful downtown, and I don't think the structure warrants the investment that would be required to keep it. So that's where my position would be, but that's not to say that I take the decision very lightly.
Mr. Kaler?
I guess what's worried me about, all of this is I understand what we're voting on tonight, but what really worries me is what about the next building? And I know it's a building by building case, but what about the next person that says it's not economically feasible for them to keep an old building? And we want to tear it down and make it into a parking lot. Are we going to have a downtown full of parking lots? Are we going to have beautiful old buildings that are restored? And I do have a little problem with the economic hardship part of this ordinance, and I think it's something that we need to work on this ordinance to make it more defined. I mean, aren't there certain parameters that you have to go by when you say you have an economic hardship. A statement, something that's laid out that says this is beyond our financial capabilities. So I think that needs to be a little more clear in the ordinance. So those are just some things that really bother me. I do not agree with Jerry, absolutely do not agree with her that we need to tear buildings down and make parking lots. You know, that's one of the worst things you can do to a historic downtown. As a matter of fact, on 3rd Street from the fire station, we tore all those buildings down and made a parking lot. There's a building that was torn down by Italian Village that's a parking lot. So now go down 3rd Street more, and we're going to have 2 really big parking lots. But we don't want a parking garage down by the floodwall murals. We do not want that. But we do need lots more parking lots elsewhere. So just some things I wanted to say.
Yeah, we had a economic development prospect in yesterday, and he was bragging about how attractive our downtown is. And it was probably the reason they are going to come to Paducah. I think Commissioner Kaler is exactly right. We've got to be careful that we lose these old buildings. It can pyramid, and we don't want that. This city commission is funding PRA, and we're giving them a lot of money to bring Paducah downtown back. We feel like, this commission feels like, that your downtown is your heart. And if you don't have a strong heart, you're not going to have a strong community. That is in our goals, in our objectives, in a written document. And this commission supports that. We are funding PRA in order to bring businesses downtown. And we're going to continue to do that. We've got to have more than just restaurants. We've got to have retail. And we feel like we're on the right track, but we still have work to do. And Commissioner Kaler's exactly right. We've got to have buildings for these businesses to go in. We've got another organization called PRDA, which has a board of directors and is working on preserving downtown, is working on the new hotel, the riverfront, the ramp, in order to bring all of Lower Town, downtown, the convention center, the riverfront together. So we have an awful lot of people working hard to make Paducah strong, make downtown Paducah strong, excuse me. So we've got to continue to work at it, and we will continue to work.
Mayor, before I read this ordinance, I do want to make a comment that, one of the most difficult things that I think I have been faced with during this whole process is, how I personally feel may be one way, but what we've been charged with as a commission is a little differently, because what we've been asked to do is review what the decision of the Demolition Control Board was actually, and we were asked to look at the evidence that they had before them and review their decision. So how we felt personally about something, as I've really tried to set aside. And I think that's been the most difficult thing for me personally. And you can probably understand knowing some of the comments that you just made, and I know that Commissioner Kaler and we've all made, because we feel passionately about the money that we've put into PRA. But I think that probably Beverly and Ronnie feel that way too, because of all the properties that you've done. I've worked with Beverly previously, and I know that Lisa has made a very strong case here. But when I look over the evidence, we've asked these people to make a decision, and the one thing that I see is that all three of them unanimously voted on the economic hardship. That's the one thing that they all agreed on. So to me, it appears as if there was enough evidence to support that one decision. There was back and forth about whether or not the fabric and whether or not it was contributing that argument there. But the economic hardship and the return, and that's the one thing that does appear that there's enough evidence for me. That's the way I interpret this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do say to Lisa that the difficulty of bringing this building back to life is the fact that the roof has gotten so bad, and somehow when a roof starts to go bad, somehow we have got to address it, and I don't know how we find it out. But if you address something early on, you can avoid having a complete collapse and having it completely out of hand on fixing the building up. So, there are things that PRA can do that can keep this kind of and I'm not, Lisa, I'm not being critical here. I'm just making a statement that we've just got to do more, and we've got to do better. Commissioner Galt, would you like to read the motion?
Do you have it?
It's underneath there.
You had it.
I have it. I move that the Board of Commissioners that there was sufficient evidence to support the decision of the Demolition Control Committee. I think you might have left out a word.
I think I left out a word.
Find? Okay. I move that the Board of Commissioners find that there was sufficient evidence to support the decision of the Demolition Control Committee.
Second.
All right. Does everybody understand the motion? Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Galt?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaler?
Aye.
Commissioner Watkins?
Aye.
Mayor Paxton?
Aye. Thank you all very much. I'd like to thank Dan Key, the city attorney, for his help in this matter. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Moving on, City Manager, please don't take offense to the fact that everybody's leaving the chamber, but do you have any comments?
Thanks for coming.
You have nothing in
You mean on the item we just finished?
No, you're city manager.
I'm sorry.
We got one more
We
item.
got another item.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
He's ready to leave.
Okay.
I have it.
You have that, Commissioner Abraham? All
I
right.
do. I move that a municipal order entitled, "A Municipal Order Authorizing the Mayor to Execute a Letter of Intent to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers supporting the Ohio River shoreline, Paducah, Kentucky, LEPP Reconstruction Project Feasibility Report, pleading the city's cooperation with the Ohio River shoreline, Paducah, Kentucky Reconstruction Project, of offering the city's assistance in the initiation of the pre-construction engineering and design activities associated with the reconstruction project be adopted."
Second.
All right, Mr. Murphy.
Mayor, Commission, I'll give you I'll try to give you a 90-second version of a 14-year process. In 1998, they did a 905 beach study, the Corps of Engineers, through Congressman Whitfield, whereas That's the first study to see whether or not there's a national or federal interest in the project. That came back in May of 2001 that there was. Following that, there was a WERDA bill passed by Congress in 2007 that positioned the city of Paducah to have a feasibility study performed on the wall, and basically that is, okay, is a project still a viable project, and are the benefits outweighing the cost? Just for show and tell, this is the feasibility study that the city of Paducah participated in over the past 24 months with the Corps of Engineers. The study here was about an $800,000 study where we cost shared with the Corps 50-50 on that. So you are well vested in this project. And now the next stage of that project, it will be to, as Commissioner Abraham read, the pre-construction and engineering design plans for the project, whereas this letter of intent just says, okay, basically, the city of Paducah is still interested in pursuing a project that we've been working on for 14 years. So we're not wanting to back out now. It is not legally binding, but they need that letter to move forward with the PED. And prior to any construction, you will be, this commission or a future administration will be asked to enter into an agreement to move forward with the project. The project right now is estimated at $19.5 million, of which you will be a 35% cost share in, and that's about $6.8 million, of which $2.1 million you've already spent in your slip line that you have a credit for. So we'd be looking at around $4.7 million sometime down the road, of which we would, I'm sure, have to borrow the money for that. To make these improvements, and then we're working with the Corps. I don't know that that project would be all one big project. It might be 4 phase projects where the dollars could be more manageable.
Just quickly brief the commission on what we did in the first phase.
In the first phase, as far, well, are we talking about in 1998, or are we talking about in the slip lining project?
Slip lining.
Okay, in 95, the Corps identified our corrugated metal pipes. They're just big pipes that gravity drain water through the levees, and those are 60 years old, and they had deteriorated so much that they were on the border of collapsing. And so what we did is we slid a structural pipe through what we call the hose pipe, and then we filled that with a filler so that we didn't have to dig those out. And we've estimated we saved about 60 cents on the dollar by going with that method, by slip lining the $2.1 million project that we've done there. And we fixed that. I think we finished that project in 2010. So that's included in this study, but it's there as a credit because as we've not started an actual construction project, it's atypical that you're going to get a credit. But the Corps, the Louisville District, and the Cincinnati Division worked really hard to go to the Assistant Secretary of the Army and get that permission, or that what we call an exception to policy, and that credit is here. And if there's ever a future project, that $2.1 million will be realized on our part of the 6.8, well, the 19.5 million, 6.8 million will be covered by Paducah, 2.1 of which is already covered.
The
Corps, it's a lot of numbers, but
yeah, the Corps is basically saying that we need to do this work in order to make the flood wall stable for the next 70 years.
The next 50 years.
Or next 50 years. They feel this needs to be done. I think the flooding last year got all of our attention when we had to put the flood walls in and the water was up on the wall, and the Corps was down here in the Coast Guard on a weekly basis, making sure that the wall was safe. It was safe. I think thanks to Rick and his people, we're the poster child for the way people should maintain flood walls in their town. And people, the Coast Guard and the Corps talk about that often, but this work needs to be done. Now, there's a couple issues. Everybody knows Congress doesn't have any money, so they're going to have to approve the funding, and whether that happens or not, we don't know. Hopefully they will, and then we will eventually, as Rick said, have to float a bond issue for probably be in stages for our 35%.
That's correct.
Any questions?
Is that 35% of 4 million?
No, that would be 35% of 19.5 million.
So 4.
Of which 2 million.
Which is the total project, but we've already spent 2.1 million that we're going to get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
So our total share is 6.8 million as it is today. Do the math. 4.7 will be our total share because we have a $2.1 million credit.
Congressman Whitfield has been very helpful in this endeavor, and hopefully will continue to be, and I know he will. So if there are no further questions, Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Galt?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaler?
Aye.
Commissioner Watkins?
Aye.
Mayor Paxton?
Aye. Rick, thank you very much for your hard work on this very important project for Paducah.
I'll probably retire when it's done.
Yeah, yeah. All right, City Manager.
We do have an executive session scheduled for 2 items, one economic development and another one's personnel issue.
Okay. Any commissioner comments?
You have, I passed out, you guys saw this, with general fund budgets just being what they are, strained. There was an interesting article on the police spokesman for Radcliffe, Kentucky, and the very creative way he goes about locating equipment for that city. So I gave each one of you guys a copy. You can read about that. I also gave Police Chief Berry one. I'm going to Radcliffe this week and set up a meeting with him just to kind of pick his brain a little bit. So just keeping you guys in the know on that.
Good, good, thank you. Any public comments? All right, who has the motion for executive session?
I do.
Commissioner Galt.
I move that the board go into closed session for discussion of matters pertaining to the following topics. Issues which might lead to the appointment, dismissal, or disciplining of an employee as permitted by KRS 61.8101F. A specific proposal by a business entity where public discussion of the subject matter would jeopardize the location, retention, expansion, or upgrading of a business entity as permitted by KRS 61.8101G.
Second.
All right, any comments? Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Abraham?
Aye.
Commissioner Galt?
Aye.
Commissioner Kaler?
Aye.
Commissioner Watkins?
Aye.
Mayor Paxton?
Aye, we need to meet and get home before Commissioner Watkins falls asleep. We are adjourned.